Hi, welcome to my next video segment for lecture 1 for the It's Not About the Bike video series. Let me get straight to the lecture. So we're trying to be really scientific here, and although I started talking about Buddhism, I started the series talking about Buddhism, I want to emphasize one thing. I am going to be very scientific here. I personally don't buy into any of the paranormal claims made in Buddhism. In fact, I believe that stuff to be made up and false. And I will hew very close to the science and just avoid all the woo-woo stuff. So that is it as far as Buddhism is concerned and its relation to paranormal claims and how I view them. And sorry that the last word that I spoke got cut off in my previous lecture, and that word was depression, as you must have no doubt gathered. So apologies for that. So again, this is a video series. This is a video series about mental health, mental wellness, specifically about how to handle stress, anxiety, and depression. And I did only mention anxiety and depression the last time, but stress is closely related to anxiety and depression. And the techniques that I'm outlining will be helpful for combating stress as well. Okay, so as I said, we're trying to be really scientific here. So we're going to, and as you know, this particular lecture is called "If You Meet the Buddha on the Road, Teach Him Tennis." Okay, so we're trying to be scientific here. So let us start by defining terms. Compassion. What is compassion? Under compassion-focused therapy, compassion is a basic kindness with deep awareness of the suffering of oneself and of other living things, coupled with the wish and effort to relieve it. So two things: an awareness of the suffering, both of oneself and of other living things, and also an engagement which is like the wish and effort to actually relieve it. Okay, so that is compassion. Compassion is really a multifaceted process, and it has evolved from the caregiver mentality, double quotes, found in human parental care and child rearing, right? So you can see here a picture of a Buddhist monk. He has his head on the leg of the elephant, and as you can see, he seems to be very calm and tranquil, and so is the elephant. And somehow that really, for me, captures what compassion is. Even animals display compassion. Elephants have been shown to display compassion in the wild, and a lot of animals, do show compassion. So it's not something that is limited only to humans, and it involves a number of emotional, cognitive, and motivational elements. That is what compassion. That's how compassion is. That's how compassion works. Now, I must say that I'm reading Buddhism with a great deal of compassion. I must, in spite of the fact that I'm disagreeing so much with Buddhism and Buddhist ideas, I would say that I am actually starting from a point of compassion. That is, I'm reading the text with a great deal of compassion. What do I mean by that? I'll give you an example. So here is a famous line: "Two roads diverged in a yellow wood." So this is, of course, the first few words of the poem by Robert Frost, the well-known poem. Now, you can read this poem, so as a way of illustrating what I mean by compassion, I'll say, look, you can read this poem in different ways. You can read it with a total lack of compassion, and you can read the poem, or you can read the poem with a lot of compassion. So what I mean by that? You can, read the poem as, with the Robert Frost ending the poem by saying, the title of the poem, as you know, is "The Road Not Taken," right? And he ends the poem with the lines, "And two words diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference." So if you read it with a total lack of compassion, you might say he's boasting. He's saying, look how far I've come because, I took the less traveled road. I became a poet, and that is why I am what I am. But a more compassionate way of reading this poem is that, we are all like that. We all have to make these choices. And as for him, he could have taken the easy path, but he went through a lot of he must have gone through a lot of struggle, because of course nobody who becomes a poet can escape that these days, especially with the advent of internet technologies, where your poems are just made available to everyone for free. So So the more compassionate way of viewing it, keeping the human in mind, the Robert Frost in mind, is to say that, he's just saying that, I did go through a lot of hardship and somehow I managed to make it through. So this is an illustration of how you can read a text with compassion or without compassion. So I started off by reading all the text with a great deal of compassion, and then only am I declaring my independence from the text and declaring and talking about my own opinions. And this is important. Is an important point to keep in mind, because not everything that I'm saying is complete divorced from Buddhism, nor is it the case that everything I'm saying is basically Buddhism. In fact, I'll talk about that as well. But the important thing to keep in mind is when I talk about mindfulness, it is supposed to be a mindfulness or vipassana meditation. We have to keep in mind that is supposed to be a context for compassion. So mindfulness, vipassana meditation, these are supposed to be contexts for compassion. So, even within the Buddhist framework, so as you can see from this, from the first bullet point, according to B. Alan Wallace, historically, Buddhist practice did not suggest mindfulness was to be pursued as an end in itself. What was the end? It was compassion. So, rather, it was to be cultivated as an enduring state of being that allowed the further development of wholesome states of mind. And these states of mind would eventually lead to liberation from suffering, and compassion was prominent among these states. Another way to think about it is that mindfulness is a foundation. It's like, look at this picture, those foundational stones, that is what mindfulness is. And the arch that is built on top of it is the benefits you get out of it. And compassion is something that one must evince, one must manifest in order to really see all the benefits, in fact, of compassion-based therapy. In fact, as we know, people from other religious traditions have also recovered from depression. They've also recovered from PTSD and stress-related disorders. How did they do that? I would say that compassion is really the key factor. It is really the fact that they must have had someone who showed them compassion, maybe family members, maybe co-workers, maybe even the odd Buddhist monk who must have shown them some compassion, and that must be what must have led, a person like Gregory Scott Brown to recover from the depression he was facing. And if you want to know who that is, just Google for Gregory Scott Brown and look for the book The Self-Healing Mind. Okay. So mindfulness, as I was just saying, is meant to be a foundation for compassion. It's not a foundation for what we're trying to achieve. It is not meant to be an end in and of itself. And this is an important point to keep in mind, because, compassion in and of itself is really what you need what you need to solve this problem of anxiety, to solve this problem of depression, solve this problem of deep stress, etc. Okay, and I should mention, this video series is for those who want to win. This is absolutely for those who want to win. If you want to win your battle against stress, against anxiety and depression, that is who this video series is for. Because the important thing to keep in mind is that, there is now a lot of doubt, even in the scientific community, whether drugs have sufficient efficacy to solve depression and anxiety for everyone, and I'll come to that later. Now I'd like to just segue a little bit and talk a little bit about Theravada, the Vipassana within the Theravada tradition. So Vipassana is a Pali word. It comes from the Sanskrit word vipassana. It literally means superior or special insight or special seeing. And in the Pali canon, there's this concept called samatha, which means calm or serenity, and vipassana, which just means special seeing or insight. And they're not really specific practices, but they are supposed to be elements of this single path, which is what the Buddha called the Eightfold Path. And so it is meant to be centered around a life of ethics, and without that, you really don't. This concept of mindfulness doesn't really work. It is supposed to be within a context, within a Buddhist context. And in fact, the Vipassana meditation was actually no longer practiced in the Theravada tradition by the 10th century. This was due to the belief that Buddhism itself had degenerated and that liberation was no longer attainable until the coming of the future Buddha, who's called the Maitreya. It was actually reinvented in Myanmar in the 18th century, right? And this led to the rise of the Vipassana movement later in the 20th century. So you must keep in mind that there have been some historical, ups and downs in terms of Vipassana itself as being part of Buddhism. So we must keep that also in mind. So mindfulness is a foundation, but it's like we must also keep in mind that mindfulness is not the only foundation. Okay, so that is as far as Vipassana is concerned. So let's go on to the next slide. If you meet the Buddha on the road, teach him tennis. So why did I make that the title of this talk? So this is lecture 3 in the third video segment in lecture 1, actually, in lecture 1. And this one is entitled, If You Meet the Buddha on the Road, Teach Him Tennis. So let's take a look at those tennis balls in that picture. So the guy has thrown the tennis balls up. That is actually supposed to be a representation of me. I tried to get an AI to create a picture of me with the Buddha, trying to teach him tennis, actually. So anyway, look at the balls, right? So the balls are actually in a parabola, and let's maybe try to do a little bit of thinking scientifically what is going on here, right? So the ball is under the force of gravity. The force of gravity is denoted by G. The force of acceleration is usually denoted by A. So A equals what? D squared x over dt squared. If you know some calculus, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, just bear with me when I get through this. So now what is integral a dt? Let's integrate both sides and see if we can do something useful here. Get some useful results here. So integral a dt equals integral d squared x over dt squared dt. So if you look at the left hand side, integral a dt, a is constant because it's the force of gravity. It's constant, as long as the height of the ball is not too high. So you have a integral dt, so that equals a t2 minus t1. That is what you have on the left hand side. On the right hand side, you have integral d squared x over dt squared dt, which would differentiate to integral of dx over dt, or v, between the initial and final points. So you have equals v2 minus v1. So you have on the left hand side a t2 minus t1. On the right hand side, you have v2 minus v1. Equating both, you have a times t2 minus t1 equals v2 minus v1, or v2 equals v1 plus a times t, using t to denote the total time. So you have v equals u plus at. So this, let me call this the first integration of the acceleration equation sutra, because I want to say something. I want to use a sutra to illustrate something. What I want to illustrate is that none of what I just said in the let's call it the acceleration sutra. None of what I said in the acceleration sutra is going to be found in any of the Buddhist texts. That's number one. Number two, the Buddha himself would probably Buddha himself was not infallible. He was also not omniscient. He in fact did not know calculus. He in fact did not know that such a thing as a equals v equals u plus at, such an equation exists. So, given that he came from a pre-scientific, from a pre-modern time, how much can we really ascribe to the Buddha's supposed omniscience? I would say very little. So that is where the Acceleration Sutra is playing a role in helping us understand that the Buddha did not know everything. And so Buddhism per se cannot be the be-all, end-all to everything. We cannot rely on the Buddhist scriptures for solving all our issues. And in fact, Buddhism is only a school of thought within the Dharmic tradition, but I don't want to impose my own interpretation of Buddhism at all here. I want to stay very close to science and say that if you do meet the Buddha on the road, teach him tennis, and also try to teach him some calculus and why, and also teach him why the balls behave the way they do. Because by teaching him tennis, he'll hopefully understand what he did not know about, say, Newton's laws of motion. And he will probably, if he were a decent chap, would agree that there were many things that he did not know when he was preaching, and maybe the answers are partially to be found in Buddhism and partially to be found in scientific papers. And that is why I made it very clear in my second video segment that I had consulted a number of psychologists, because I strongly believe the answers to all these questions, such as anxiety and depression, cannot be found in Buddhism alone. You have to read research papers, and that is true whether you're trying to cure gingivitis or you're trying to solve a problem like anxiety and depression. So I would warn people not to rely on Buddhism alone as your answer to anything. It's true that a lot of scholars in the West are fans of Buddhism, but I think compassion is really the key. Compassion in some form, and at the same time, I want to say, its title, "If You Meet the Buddha on the Road." I also say that at the same time, there are many insights that we can get from Buddhism that will help us overcome issues related to anxiety and depression. Now, I want to jump straight into scientific concepts from this lecture onwards, because it's very important. I think that science is the way that we're going to use in this video series. And it is very important to use science as much as possible, stay very close to truth and because science will tell us what will actually work, So let's get straight into it. I'm going to right away introduce scientific concepts from psychology. So let's think of our brain. Let's think about, say, Ananda. Ananda. Maybe I should have, I should have said, I should have narrated the Acceleration Sutra like this. And so I have heard, in the 21st century, one person was facing a lot of issues with health, and he could not solve them by using Buddhism alone. And he dealt da-da-da-da. But I don't want to make this about me, because I am the least important in all of this. What is important is you, and making sure that you get some value out of this. So let me get straight to the science of this. So there are three types of emotion regulation. So let's think of a hypothetical Ananda, not me, but the famous disciple of the Buddha, who was called Ananda. There are many things we even know about Ananda, the earlier Ananda, that, for instance, he had a fantastic memory, that he was full of compassion, etc., etc., etc. So anyway, let's take Ananda. There's a modern day Ananda. He wakes up in, let's say, Foster City in the Bay Area. He wakes up in the morning and his alarm clock goes off. He's sleeping until then, having a very comfortable sleep actually. He wakes up, has breakfast, puts on his work clothes, drives one exit down from Foster City to Redwood Shores, where his workplace is. But before he can get there, there's a truck that runs a red light, and he almost hits it. He brakes at the last second. He breathes a sigh of relief, and then he goes, parks the car in the parking garage, and then off he goes to the 8th floor, and he starts programming. He's very focused, and by the time it's 1 o'clock, he's already coded up large parts of a parser for Qwykr, and he's very, very thrilled to see that, or rather he's already debugged the code that he wrote, and he's very pleased with the progress he made so far. And he's going to go and get lunch, and so he then decides to interrupt his work. And that is where we'll stop the story of the latter-day Ananda. And we'll leave him to his devices. I'm sure he knows how to get down to the ground floor and get lunch, etc., etc. So we need not worry about him any further. But the story is, I'm giving you the story so that I can illustrate three types of emotion regulation. So there are three different types of emotion regulations. There's three mental modes which we operate, for lack of a better word, three emotion regulation modes really that we operate under. The first is threat focused. So when Anand was braking for the truck and avoiding that collision very narrowly, he was in the threat focus mode. So he was focused on protection, protecting himself, and his brain was functioning in a certain way. That is, the neurotransmitters, if you somehow were able to sample the neurotransmitters going through neurotransmitters, then you would find that he had a certain set of neurotransmitters at the time. So that is threat focused behavior. Then there is safety focused behavior. What is safety focused behavior? It is like when he was sleeping. He was sleeping. There was no threat to him in any fashion. He was in a very safe place. His breathing was normal, etc., etc., etc. Right? So we have safety focused, and then we have incentive focused. Okay, or resource focused. What is this? This is when he's working. He's like he's working on his programming. He's getting things accomplished, and he's just making progress on his work. Right, so these are three different modes that we work in. Okay, so the first mode, threat focus, also is basically termed as the fight or flight response, also called hyperarousal. Okay, this is the hyperarousal response. This is basically characterized by escalated heart rates with fast breathing. You probably experienced it. Maybe you've hopefully had a close call like that at some point of time, because these things are good for you to know that life is impermanent. So maybe you've had an experience like that, and hopefully you've come through it fine. The important thing to keep in mind is that it is basically it is a general discharge of the sympathetic nervous system happening there. It is basically preparing you, the animal, for fighting or fleeing. So either fight the response or flee away from it. So imagine you see a lion in the savannah. You're going to either fight the lion or run away from it, depending on what judgment you make of the situation. And so what your body is doing, essentially, it's pumping a lot of blood through your system, preparing you to engage in that running activity. And for that, you need to get your whole body going. And that is what is going on over there. And at this specific time, the adrenal medulla will produce a hormonal cascade. That's what I'm reading here from Wikipedia. It will result in the secretion of norepinephrine and epinephrine, and it'll also cause the secretion of estrogen, testosterone, and cortisol, as well as the neurotransmitters dopamine and serotonin. So, as you can see, a whole flood of neurotransmitters are secreted. And it is not just cortisol, by the way. It's even dopamine. Dopamine, which we always think of it as the pleasure hormone, is also secreted when you are engaging in the fight or flight response. Now, the thing about the reason why it is important to understand these three modes is because therein lies the solution to the problems that we face when we encounter when we start getting into anxiety and depression. So I've given you a little bit of context about the threat-focused mode of thinking. So as you can see, it's a mode that your brain operates in, right? So your brain, you've probably experienced this. Your brain is essentially, it's basically preparing itself for danger. Okay. Now then, and we are still creatures of evolution, and so our body reacts pretty much the same way whether we see a lion or whether we see a truck that's about to hit us, right? So that part of our physiology has not changed for thousands of years. Why? Because our body has not had time to evolve, and so we are still engaging in the same type of the hormones secreted. We're still engaging in the same sort of secretion as we always did, right? So that is threat focus. What is affiliative focus? So that is the rest and digest response. So this response calms the body down after a danger is passed. So after this is passed, what will happen typically is that your body will calm itself down, okay? And here what happens is the parasympathetic nervous system gets activated, the parasympathetic nervous system, and that is what you were experiencing when you were sleeping. Okay, your parasympathetic nervous system is activated, and then after you, but the thing is, like when we are going straight to work, the parasympathetic nervous system never gets activated. You see, in the normal course of things, you run away from the lion, and then you can just lie down and let the the other neurotransmitters take over, and then you'll just calm down, and it's more healthy for you, if you just kind of do what your body wants you to do. But because we are no longer on the savannah, we perceive that the threat has completely passed. There is no danger anymore, and we just go on to our next brain mode, which is incentive/resource focus. So this is the drive mode. This is where we get things done. And this is characterized by wanting, pursuing, achieving, consuming. So these are things that we do at work, and so we immediately switch to that mode without getting into the green, the stuff in green, the green mode. Now this is the red mode, this is the green mode, and this is the blue mode. We immediately go to the blue mode, and we go straight from here to here. We do not make a stop here. And when we do vipassana, what effectively happens is we make a stop here in the middle of the day, and that lets our body reset itself. Okay. So let's go to this slide here. So understanding our motives and emotions. So there are 3 types of emotion regulation: those that focus on threat and self-protection, those that focus on doing and achieving, and those that focus on contentment and feeling safe. Now these emotions actually guide us to our social goals. So like if our goal is to get to work, our emotion, which is, or if our goal is to actually protect ourselves from the truck, let us use that as an example. If you want to protect ourselves from the truck, it is our emotion, which is like the scare, the fear that is put in us when the truck comes, that guides us towards braking. And then we scan the environment, make sure we are safe, and then we continue to drive, and we reach our workplace. And then we try and achieve focus. We start working, and so again we are guiding again to our social goal, which is to have organizational achievement. And that is number 2, those that focus on doing and achieving, it says here. So motives and their social mentalities, they evolve because they help animals survive and leave genes behind, right? So these things helped animals survive, and that is why all these emotional regulation modes all these mental modes are important. They're important. We cannot live without them. At the same time, when something goes out of whack, when we get depressed, and there is something we need to do about it, right? So these are concepts that the Buddha would never know, right? So that's why I said if you meet the Buddha on the road, teach him tennis. So teach him tennis, use it as a way for him to understand there are many things that he did not know, right? So that is it as far as this video segment is concerned. I hope you got a little something out of this. I would definitely recommend for you to read the book The Self-Healing Mind by Gregory Scott Brown. He's a practicing physician, and he has talked about how one should incorporate meditation as part of a 5-step plan for better mental health and better living. Thanks for watching, and see you guys again next time.